I don't mind where anybody sits. I'm going to be up here because, hey, John, David, somebody, help me. Can you shut those doors? Thanks. No, we're good. I was just trying to get those doors shut. We're live streaming. We had a couple of members who are homebound who said that they'd like to be a part of this course, and so we are live streaming. So I'm going to do it from up here. It's a little different than we typically do, which is more sort of in a circle and conversational style. I'm going to try to do that a little bit here. And because of my schedule, and I ended a little late, we have a lot going on in the life of the church, so I had an extended announcements. I'll usually wrap up 10:45 to 10:50, because then I have to put a tie on and put a robe on and get going. So I'm really glad that you're here. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about the concept of truth. And I want to get into a little bit about what we mean when we ask the question, what is truth? But I want to give a little brief summary about the impetus for this particular series of why I wanted to do this. Ryan and I had this scheduled for a while, and I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. Come on in. I didn't know what I want to do until a couple weeks ago when it dawned on me that we are living in this time, and I want to preface this by saying this is not a Trump, this is not about a response to Donald Trump. Just want to be very clear about that. Although I do think that responses to Donald Trump make up part of the impetus of why we're having this conversation. But I want to take a step back, and what we're going to do next week is talk about how I would say that both the right and the left have been deeply influenced by understandings of truth from postmodern philosophy. That this is not where postmodern philosophy is off limits for one sort of political, religious, sociological, spectrum, conservative or liberal. But the way that we think about truth today has infiltrated every sphere of our living, and we'll get really into that next week. We'll just sort of scratch the surface today. But over the last several years, there has been this assault, quote unquote, on absolute truth. And you hear a lot of conservative folks, particularly theologically conservative folks, talking about the death of absolute truth. And their big response to postmodernism was everyone is saying that there's no absolute truth, that truth is relative. You've heard that before, right? And so we've got to establish the absolute truth of the Christian faith. And that's a very United States Western experience that I'm talking about right now. So you've heard that before, and there were commentators, there were authors, there were speakers, there were preachers. 20 years ago, this was like a hot button line, right? The defense of absolute truth, right? But then now, today, you've got sort of the emergence of the so-called fake news and alternative facts, and that's used liberally by both sort of conservatives and liberals and everybody in between. This new vernacular has come to pass where we talk about sort of the bias of the media, the bias of reporting, the bias and subjectivity of human experience. Okay, these are all natural offshoots of the postmodern legacy around the definition of truth. So we continue to have this. It's now made its way. This is so fascinating as philosophy does. It's usually 25 to 40 years behind schedule from moving from the academy to the public square. But it happens in so many different ways across the millennium, where you have something that has been embedded in the academy for a long time, and it only makes its way a generation or two later into the public square. And we'll talk about that again. The belief that many of us, but by many people, that we live in a post-truth world. I thought about asking that question by doing a show of hands, but then I thought that could just spiral out of control. So you keep that to yourself. But some people think that we live in a post-truth world where truth doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. What matters is my perception, my experience, my safety, whether I'm a victim or not, whether or not I feel like I'm right. It doesn't matter what you think, right? So this post-truth era. So all of that, for me, comes to this last asterisk, this last point. Because as a Christian, for me, as a Christian, and then being part of a confessional community, right? You know what I mean by that? A confessional community, we're a church that has confessions that are historic. We have a long view of our faith. We know that the gospel didn't start in some mega church 50 years ago. We know that. We know that understanding how to read Scripture didn't start with the fundamentalist modernist controversy in the early 1900s. We know that our faith dates way beyond that. And our oldest confession, the Apostles' Creed, outside of Scripture, the oldest confession of Apostles' Creed was 150 AD, and we still say it. We say it regularly in different settings for worship. We still affirm it. And we affirm it at some level when we confess it. We confess it as truth. So what is it that you believe? This is what I believe. And there's a truth, what I call a truth factor to being a confessional Christian. That you believe somehow the truth, putting in big air quotes, all capital letters, the truth resides in our understanding of the Word of God, in our historic confessions, in our theology, and our convictions. Right? So in a world that is post-truth, and I would say that at some level, the decline of the church in the West is related to some of these challenges. I don't need a community to tell me what to confess. I don't need a community to tell me what I need to explore when it comes to understanding how the world works and my place in it. Right? The beauty of confessional community is that it's not an individual sport. The whole community comes together and lays claim to this. And look, one of the beautiful things about this church is that we welcome anybody to this church, right? Anybody can be a part of it. But to be a member, what do you have to do? I will ask audience participation on this. What do you have to do to be a member? There's one thing. Confess your faith. Right. There's one thing. You have to confess your faith in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And people nuance that and parse that in different ways. But you cannot be a member unless you confess that. Confess that that's a truth that you hold. What is more, if you want to be an elder, how many elders or deacons, people ordained in the church? Just raise your hand. Raise your hand. So many of you, right, who are elders and deacons, what did you have to do? Not so many, all of you. What did you have to do? You had to do a statement of faith. You had to affirm your covenant ordination vows, those 9 vows, like we just had here in the service when we were doing the commissioning. You had to affirm your faith. You had to affirm that you were committed to our historic tradition. So there's standards that we have. And then, of course, pastors have the same standards. Pastors have to say the same questions if they're going to be ordained as leaders in the life of the church. So how do you put that all together, right? Does you understand some of the anxiety and the tension and the dissonance that one can experience trying to be part of a confessional community that collectively affirms truth? Again, big air quotes, all caps. But in an age that has deemed itself in many ways as a post-truth era. So that's what gets me in the room. I don't know what got you in the room. Maybe you're here by accident. Maybe Ryan was going to be here. But what gets me in the room is my interest in this conversation. Okay? Does that make sense? Any questions about that so far, about just sort of the impetus? Bruce, go ahead. I'll repeat the questions. Yeah.
What if, as we come to this church or any Christian church, we still have reservations about what those old statements say, knowing that back in those days, they had difficulty reading.
So here's a beautiful question that Bruce said. Bruce said, what about those who come to this church to be, this is a very pastoral concern, who come to this church who want to be a part but still have questions and are wrestling? I loved Ryan's sermon last Sunday, just to invoke him again. It's always good to invoke Ryan. He talked about the mystery and the stars. We see the stars, but we don't exactly know where they lead. And I love that image. I love that image that we're beckoned by the star, the light. I would say the light of God, the light of Christ. We're called to follow. And we're called to follow, as one of the ancients, as one of the great theologians said, faith-seeking understanding. Right? Here's where the standards are. And this, again, is pastoral. It's not necessarily the trajectory of Bruce, but I'm glad you named it because it's an important pastoral question. You may still have questions, but if you can't affirm certain things, then we have standards. That doesn't mean that you're not included in the community life, but it may mean that you're not included in formal ways of our life together. So we want to be a big tent, but we also want to be on parade. Follow me? We want to be moving in a direction. And we have staked our claim on humbly following Jesus Christ with conviction and compassion. But if Bruce and I, just to use this example, if Bruce and I talked about what does that mean, we may have divergent understanding of what that means. But when we come back together, we say, yes, we're committed to this way of living. So there's space for mystery, of course. There's space for nuance. There's space for plurality. I'm going to talk about that in the third week. There's place for diversity. But there's also a core common conviction that establishes the rhythm of our faith and our life together. So you hold those in balance. And in the third week, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the theology behind some of what I just said. Yeah. Other thoughts just at the outset? David, thank you.
In listening to you talk, it strikes me that faith and belief and truth are not necessarily the same.
True. Philosophically speaking, that's true. Yeah, I should have prefaced this whole thing by saying language is impossible in this conversation.
Okay, that's what I was
saying. Yeah. Because David is right from a philosophical, and I'm talking about an academic perspective right now. Faith and belief are different categories than truth and understanding. And I'm only going to get into the nuance around the word truth in just a minute about what we're going to talk about. But they're not isolated is what I want to say. So confessional Christianity affirms belief in truth. But the belief and the truth are two different things. And we'll talk some about that even today. So language is impossible. Let's just put it out there. So everybody be gracious with me and with one another, because I'm going to weave in and out in some of the vocabulary of faith, but also some of the vocabulary of academic philosophy, especially today, to talk about this conversation. And certainly if we have philosophers in the room, if we have PhDs in the room who've studied this stuff, there's going to be incongruence and congruence along the way. So David, thank you for that. All right, let me just set the trajectory of where we're headed. Week 1 today, we're thinking about this question, what is truth? And really sort of just getting our minds around how do you even approach the question from a philosophical, not yet theological approach. Week 2, next week, we're going to talk, this title is Absolute Truthiness, the impact of postmodernity on the West. I want to talk about how the West has been infiltrated by postmodern thought around truth in almost every sphere and sector of our living. Okay, and I want to play that out to show how they're going to do. I'm going to do a little cursory introduction if we have time at the end, just to set us up for next week. Just some of the highlights of postmodern thought around the concept of truth. And then the third week, we're really going to take a theological dive that I think Bruce will get to some of your thoughts. But talking about the plurality of truth, a theological approach. And I'm fond of this phrase. It's not my own. My doctoral mentor, as they say in German, my doctoral father, wrote a book called Manifold Witness, the Plurality of Truth. And it's a theology of truth within this sort of this milieu, within this particular age. He got the line, manifold witness. Where did he get it? Where did he get that line? Manifold witness. Come on. Great is thy faithfulness. That's right. He got it right. Join with all nature in manifold witness. Great is thy faithfulness. We're singing. If you didn't come to the 9 or the 8, you can come to the 11 and we'll get a chance to sing that. All right? So that's where we're headed. If you're around and want to come back. So you get, I should have put like week 2, giving away $30 to every participant. Week 3. Okay. All right. So, thinking a little bit, just getting into it. I'm thinking about the text from the Gospel of John, right? The 18th chapter. Jesus before Pilate. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again. He summoned Jesus and he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or do others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you're a king?" And Jesus said, "You say that I'm a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" What is truth? Now, notice what he didn't ask. He didn't ask what is true. He didn't say what is true about you. What is true? Or is it true? Right? In this particular question, this last question. Is it true? X, Y, and Z about you. No, he asks what I would consider a bigger question. What is truth? That's a bigger question than what is true, right? So I think there are two different questions, or two different inquiries. What is true? This is not perfectly, as I mentioned to David's question earlier, this isn't perfectly, there's entanglement, there is parallel, there's enmeshment in this. But if we could just separate these just a little bit for clarity about where we're headed this morning. What is true? We look to the disciplines of science, logic, mathematics to give us that definition, right? Truth statements, truth propositions. 2 plus 2 is 4. We go to math to know if 2 plus 2 is 4. I was working with Luke this weekend with some of his homework, going through his math. We're still at that time where I can still handle the math. I think in 6th grade is where I start losing my ability to help. But the way he's graded are based on these proposition statements, right? But we'll talk about some of that even in mathematics. 2 plus 2 is 4. About, well, who told you that? What constitutes 2? What constitutes plus? Right? And we'll do a little, some of you are like, wait a minute, are we going to be doing math? No. So the next question, though, is what is truth? And I think that is a philosophical and theological question. I think that belongs to the discipline of philosophy and theology. So totally appropriate for us to have an encounter with this conversation. So what is truth? So here's what I want to do, just real quick. I want to lift up 3 theories about truth that's more chronological. It is not perfectly chronological. It's not perfectly linear. But I'm just trying to categorize. I like categories. I like lists. You probably noticed that in my preaching. In my manuscripts, I have a lot of and commas. I like lists. I like being able to put things in their own bucket. And so we're going to do this. It's imperfect, but from a consensus point of view, can I use that? Can I say it that way? Consensus point of view, these categories hold, okay? So there's the correspondence theory, and basically the ancients, from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle, all the way up through Aquinas, right, into the Middle Ages, functionally use what we now would call the correspondence theory on truth, okay? And the a priori, the thing that they held before they get into it, the thing that they hold, the assumption that they hold, a correspondence theorist holds before they get into the conversation, is that reality is objective and objectively knowable. All right? That you can know what is absolute about reality. And you can do it objectively. That somehow you just simply correspond because of the way the nature of God is and the way God revealed the truth, that it's objectively knowable. That the truth is out there somewhere and you can cut through all your subjectivity. I mean, even the notion of subjectivity would be somewhat sort of out of step with how the ancients thought, not entirely. But even to think that I can know something in and of itself, out there somewhere, outside of me, in an objective way, that's the correspondence theory, right? So propositions, this is so simple, right? Correspond to the actual state of things. Propositions accurately describe the thing. Grass is green. Okay? And a correspondence theorist would say, yes, grass is green, because I observe it in the world. I objectively observe it in the world. With no thought of the complexity of language. If I said grass is grün, some of you may be confused because you don't speak German, right? We're not talking about linguistic barriers. We're not talking about context. We're not talking about subjectivity. The correspondence theorist basically says, well, it is green because I see it and it's green, period. Does that make sense? It corresponds to the actual thing. Truth is what Aquinas said. Truth is conformity between the intellect, which is logic, and things, which is ontology. This idea, the thing in of itself, right? The actual being of the thing itself is knowable. Okay? That actual thing is knowable. That the conformity, the coming together between logic, our mind, and the thing itself produces truth. Does that make sense? All right? So that's the first theory, correspondence theory. So then the moderns come around. I'm really going to focus on Kant a little bit with Hegel, but it's really Immanuel Kant, writing in the 18th century, that he begins to flip the script a little bit. And conversations around truth, he by far was not the first or is the exclusive on this, but he really is the dominant philosopher when it comes to this conversation. He basically said, yes, reality is objective, but here's the first time philosophers began to insert subjectivity. It's objective, but only subjectively knowable. Here's the nuance. You ready? Propositions cohere to my cognition of things. Not to some like sort of objective truth reality, but it coheres to other propositions that I bring to the conversation. Okay? For example, grass is green. It coheres to my idea and my understanding, the proposition of grass. I know what grass is. Right? We could get in trouble if we were talking about, all you hippies in the room, grass is green. But I know I have other propositions. I have other propositions that I understand what you're talking about, that allows me to make an affirmation of that proposition. I know what grass is. I know what the color green is, but I know it subjectively. Not some objective thing, but it was formed in me through culture, through context, through language, all of these things, right? But Kant was not willing to give up the fact that there was such a thing called absolute truth, that it was objective. This is why even these modern philosophers held deep convictions, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, about faith. And the notion that reason, logic, could get us to the place, even through our subjectivity, where we could know the absolute truth. Okay? Hegel is more influential in that conversation than Kant. Kant is skeptical, at least in his dominant writings, that the thing in my cognition of it is nominally true. My cognition of it is nominally true, and it's dependent on propositions that I already presuppose. It's hard work to get to the thing itself, right? It's hard work to get there. Kant was skeptical about that journey. But most of the philosophers during this time, because they did have this feeling about God, they did have this feeling about revelation, they did have this belief and this faith that one could get to that place. We only experience, Kant said, the experience of the thing, not the thing itself. Right? Does that make sense? So the thing in of itself stands alone. I'm only experiencing my experience of the grass being green. Does that make sense? It's totally subjective. But the grass has its own thinginess. The German is complicated, but it has its own essence that I can't get to, but I can experience my experience of the thing. Okay? So Kant, in modern philosophy, lays the foundation. This is all the Enlightenment, just to put a little time period around it. All the Enlightenment. Kant basically paves the way for postmoderns. Let me just take a half step back. Hegel believed, some of you know this kind of process of what's called dialectical philosophy. Some of you have heard of this? The dialectic. Hegel believed that you could have a thesis and an antithesis, and you bring those together, and then it gives you a little more of the truth, and then you take that thesis and you bring the antithesis and you put it together, and it builds a little more of the truth. Hegel believed that we could reason and logic our way to this objective reality, this objective truth, okay, through what he just called a progression of the thesis and the antithesis. You say one statement is true, you say the opposite, or you give something that is in conflict with that thing, they come together to produce something new. And that then moves us forward and forward and forward. So the moderns still had a little optimism about the objective knowability of reality. Does that make sense? Just nod your head if you're just tracking. I just need at least one person. Good. All right. Postmoderns. Take another step out. Postmoderns basically say reality is subjective. Period. Reality is something that human beings actually create. Through language games, through contexts, through experiences, through common consensus, right? Through what sociologists could observe about our rituals and patterns. That there is no such thing as reality somewhere out there. Reality and truth is that which we create through our human systems and the human mind. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Truth is a cultural construct that involves language, power, community consensus, and experience. The only reason you say grass is green is because somebody told you that there is this thing called grass, and when you see it, that's what you should call it. This is community consensus. That's grass, and what you see, we're attributing to the color green. Do you believe that? Right? Because of the cultural consensus, the consensus that we say this. There is no such thing as the absoluteness of green. It's just somebody told you that. And somebody told you that that's what you should call grass. So you see how it takes it a step further, Cassandra? Sorry. I didn't see you by this light.
I'm just baffled here, but what just happened? Did you just get further and further from what we think is the truth?
Right. Basically, what I'm doing, I'm showing you what is helpful in doing this exercise is that you can see from a linear perspective, okay, how the ancients believed that reality was objective and you could objectively know it. Okay? Then the moderns said, yeah, reality may be objective, but you don't experience the thing itself. That's why they were skeptical about real experiences with God. Right? You can't experience God. You're only experiencing your experience of God. But there is a thing called God. There is something. And then you go, yes, a further step. And you say that actually not only is reality subjective and not objective, not only are you subjectively experiencing the world, but all reality is subjective. All reality, all truth claims are simply products of cultural creation, including faith, including the notion of God. They're all constructs. They're all what human beings, this is straight up, this is what you would get in a academic setting in a liberal university in an anthropology class or a sociology class. This is exactly what you'd get. You get this line of thinking, that people create their own understanding of truth out of language. Who holds the power? That's a whole big thing about. People say, knowledge is power. Well, actually, power is knowledge. Power is knowledge. Whoever controls the power actually controls the knowledge. Dorothy. Oh, now we're going. Here we go. Yeah. Go ahead.
But you also got this idea of reality as subjective in groups of people who think that science is whatever they want it to be.
Right.
And say, I am not a scientist. They'll say, I'm not a scientist, with pride, and not want to look at what is a different reality.
Right. So Dorothy, this is what I love the science thing, and I was thinking about whether you use this or not, but I'm glad you brought this up. So like the correspondence theory is, the scientists did it, said it, it's true objectively. Just put it away. 2 + 2 is 4. Then you get to the next level. You say, yeah, we've come to community consensus on 2 + 2 is 4, only because the concept of 2 coheres to what we all understand as 2. Because you could find another culture that calls what we call 2, they could call 3. Their whole life they could call 3. Now, which one is true? Well, for them, they call it 3 and we call it 2, right? So here's back to the science thought. You know, the postmodern skeptic, the scientist, when a study comes out, you know what the first question they ask? Who paid for the study? It used to be a study come out and be like, see? So Katie and I, we get this little aside. We get in these great arguments all the time about food, about like things that you get in arguments about. Like, we shouldn't eat turkey bacon anymore. I said, why, Kate? Because I read an article somewhere that says turkey bacon is bad for you. So I was like, where was it? She was like, it was a vegan magazine. Right, of course, like, of course. You know? So there's this deep suspicion because of the subjectivity of, quote unquote, the truth. And all of what I'm talking about right now is the monster has been born. And I'm going to do this is a little sneak preview. I've been saving this line. I really wanted to say it next week, but I'm going to say it for you because you came out on the first time. Donald Trump, I'm not making a political comment. I'm talking about the way he is a politician is a creation of liberal philosophy. It's not a creation of conservatism. And I'm not necessarily talking about political conservatism. I'm talking about liberal philosophy that basically says all truth is subjective. He is the epitome of that reality. Politics aside, the way he governs, the way he understands the world, and does that not make sense? Where did he go to school? I mean, my backyard, University of Pennsylvania, where I grew up, the Wharton School of Business, a historically liberal university. He didn't learn that in the Young Republican Club. You learn that in philosophy and that way of being in the world. So I say that because I'm not going to give. I'm sort of I go left, right, in the middle, up, down. I go to sleep. I do all those things. Every which way I go. It just depends. I try to use my theology to frame these things. But it's so interesting to me that so many liberals, I know that they tend to be political liberals, but I'm thinking philosophical, like liberals in the purest sense of liberalism, okay, are so worked up about Donald Trump. Liberal philosophy created that experience. I mean, he's helped it. He's bought into it. But that is what we're seeing. I've given some stuff away for next week. Now you know the punchline. But we're going to get into that next week. All right. I can't even see. Sorry. Oh, hey, Eliza. Sorry.
I'm still kind of grappling with the objective reality thing. My son is colorblind.
Yeah.
Grass thing.
Right.
What he experiences he has learned to call grass green, but he sees green and red as exactly the same thing. So if we all were colorblind, then I don't know.
This is the postmodernist example. Color blindness is a great example, Eliza. He can't see. So why does he call that? If he was asked on a test as a kid, what color is grass? Why would he put green? Because that's what someone told him. Not because it corresponds to something he can observably know, objectively, and not even because he can subjectively, not just because he can subjectively integrate it, like on his own reason, but because of community's consensus. I'm just going to use this word again. People told him that's green, that's the answer. But look, we use community consensus about things that we say are true or right or just. Let's just think of the most extreme example. This is slavery. Like, yes, it's true that slavery is okay. Well, why is that? Because, it coheres to the theory of, as a modern, it's historic, right? But in the way I'm thinking of it, it's a modern phenomenon. Modern meaning, like, I'm talking about during Kant's time, right? You have this idea that you have some presuppositions that precede. The white person is superior to the person of color. So you have a proposition that precedes that. You have a proposition that people with power can do whatever they want with people who don't have power. Right? So you build this up. Now looking back, right? It's absurd. It's appalling. I don't have the right word for it. Right? And we say that's not true. Right? But the community consensus at that time was going off of these propositions that the community affirmed and called it true.
But you can't have a culture without community.
Exactly. That's what. See, and here's the hard part. You all, me, we're all included. We can't escape the influence of postmodernity right now. I don't care if you think that you're the most modern person or the most ancient philosophical person. Trying to get outside of this conversation is impossible. To really, because all of us are influenced by this. Because we all took sociology classes. We all took anthropology classes. We all read, right? We now are exposed to so many different cultural experiences. So our natural inclination, this is why the very reason I want to have this series, our natural inclination is to lean into the fact, or lean into the confession, that everything is subjective. And everything is a cultural creation. So how is that possible? And what is that, not only is how is that possible, what does that say about our faith or our belief in God? So all of us are influenced by this. But if we were during Socrates or Plato's time, right? If we were living during that time, we'd think that what that conversation that we just had, Eliza and I just had, was absurd. Does that make sense? I mean, it doesn't make sense, but that's what I'm trying to get at, right? Yeah. Dorothy, go ahead.
But I also think that if we don't have a postmodern theory,
yes,
that we end up in cement.
Yes.
So there's got to be some melding where we can take faith over here and other things to get a synthesis, maybe.
Third week is what my attempt at doing this. No, Dorothy's, she's spot on. The third week, that's what I want to try to do. I want to try to make a case for postmodern, because I think before the last 30 years, people were trying to undo postmodernism by saying, well, look, the Bible is absolute. God is absolute. That conversation is dumb, right? And it's done, too.
Tell that to my brother.
Well, yeah, well, your brother should come. He can live stream. But what we can do is we can live within our cultural context and live within the shadow of this philosophical structure that influences everything. We'll get into that next week. It influences everything. And yet at the same time still hold our confessional Christianity. And I want to talk about how those two, they don't have to be in separate buckets, but they can be in simpatico and be integrated. Yeah, Bruce, go ahead. This is great. I'm glad there's feedback.
I was reading yesterday about Aquinas, whom we normally think of as in that earlier group.
Yeah. No, he's later,
On January, whatever it was, 1253, when he goes, question 99 of his third part of Summa Theologica.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, all that is straw compared to what I just experienced in the presence of God.
Yeah.
So that even he is, as an ancient, quote unquote, is able to see that we can't,
Middle Age,
you know, this is what I've been talking, that's been awesome, but this is real. So that even one ancient could come up with what we're thinking now.
So even, like, I'll just frame it this way for just a half second. Like, more of an Orthodox theologian in the 20th century and more of a liberal theologian in the 20th century, Karl Barth and Paul Tillich, these two theologians. And the way in which they talked about the faith and wrote about the faith, Barth talked about how the experience of Jesus Christ leaves us with no words to say. Like, it's impossible for us to actually speak the truth of that, right? Because we can't fully know the event of God and Jesus Christ, right? And so he says, we have to live in the humility that we cannot speak this. That he basically says, we can't confess. But he's an Orthodox Christian. He says, but we have to. We have to. This is one response to early postmodernity, right? And the end of the modern period, is that we have to speak even though we're incapable of that. And there's a dialectic that he holds. We can't do it, but we must. Tillich, on the other hand, is a very liberal theologian. And what does he say? Similar to Aquinas. God is the ground of my being. The ground of my being. And it's an experience. So a lot of more mainline traditions, even the Orthodox ones, are moving toward this inability to say, this is one of the responses, inability to speak. And yet we have to, or to only frame it as an experience. I experience God. That's truth. Does that make sense? So I'm glad Bruce brought that up. That's where some of the theological trajectory has gone over the last 100 years or so. All right. This is fun. I didn't know if this was going to be fun I don't know if it's fun for you. It's fun for me. That's what I'm trying to say. I love this. I love this work. I really do. 3 big ideas of postmodernity regarding truth. It's all about language and linguistic constructs. Okay? It's all about language and linguistic constructs. There are no meta-narratives or meta-truths. What does that mean? It means that there's not one story that is above every other story. So you can't just say, well, the Bible says so. And that the Bible is God's word, or the Quran says so, and that's what Allah's word is. You don't follow me on that? There's no one story that's above every other story. And then power is knowledge, as I said earlier. Whoever holds the power actually holds knowledge. If we were living in a reality that we were somehow taken over, and someone came in and said, grass is now blue, right? You either confess it to be blue or you die. What would you start calling the grass? Blue. Yeah, I would. I'd call it blue. That's blue. Blue grass. Although Boise State, they do have blue grass in the field. Anyway, so this is just to give a little setup for next week. I actually really wanted to have a little fun, but I'm at the end of time. To see how this works. To see how this works, right? I'll do this in brief. But the Philadelphia Eagles defeated the New England Patriots 41-33 in last year's Super Bowl, right? In February. They won that game. But how do I know that? Well, correspondence is I just go to the internet and I can look and I can watch video and it just objectively happened. It happened in real time. It happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Brian Jones is from, our Epiphany consultant. It happened there. We can just verify it. Coherent is I start saying, yeah, there's something called the Super Bowl out there, and the only reason I know it is because I have all these other cohesive statements and propositions about football, about the Philadelphia Eagles, about the New England Patriots, about scores, right? What does 41-33 mean in my logic, in my way of thinking, of what I've been culturally conditioned to do, right? The postmodernists may step in and say, well, no, actually, this is a false statement. You know why? Because the Philadelphia, in the Pop Warner League in Louisiana, the team that was the Philadelphia Eagles, the 10-year-old Pop Warner team, they lost to the New England team in their Pop Warner Super Bowl, right? 54-35. Do you follow me on that? So all of a sudden that statement is not truth. Because it's contextually, well, what? Because no, when I said that, you all thought the NFL, right? No, I was actually talking about Pop Warner in Louisiana. So it's not a true statement. You follow me how this works? So this is just, I mean, we did this in 40 minutes. Come on, people. This is not, exhaustive. But what are you pointing at, Stephanie?
My watch.
Oh, your watch. Thank you. All right. Stephanie's like, stop talking. Okay. So we're 10:46. This is just the groundwork of where I'm trying to get us to. Just to understand a little bit about the theories and then how postmodernism, we're going to jump right off of this, how this, what they call the constructivist theory of truth, launches us into our reality as we know it, and then how do you deal with that reality theologically. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in worship.
Do we get Tony? Do we get Martin Luther King another play?